My own sister punched me in the face, not on a battlefield, but in a VIP lounge. But the blow that truly broke me came from my mother. What did you do to make her so angry? They thought they were throwing out the trash. They didn't realize they were creating a soldier. My name is Alora Finch. I'm 29 years old, a veteran, and tonight I was nothing more than a prop. The ballroom at the Driskill Hotel in Austin was dripping with crystal and old money, the air thick with the scent of expensive perfume and quiet ambition. On stage, my sister, Kaylin, shone under the spotlights. She was a tech CEO, a philanthropist, a master of manipulating the narrative. And tonight, I was her favorite story. And I owe so much of my inspiration to my younger sister, Alora. Kaylin's voice, smooth as polished marble, echoed through the sound system. Her bravery, her sacrifice in Afghanistan, it's the bedrock upon which our Aegis Veterans Fund was built. On cue, a spotlight found me. I stood, the applause washing over me like a warm, suffocating tide. I smiled. It wasn't a real smile. It was a mask, forged in the deserts of a foreign land and perfected in the strained silence of family dinners. It was the smile of a good soldier, disciplined and hollow. After the applause died down, Kaylin descended from the stage, her hand gripping my arm with a proprietary firmness. "Come on," she murmured, her public smile still dazzling. She pulled me from the opulent ballroom, down a plush-carpeted hallway, and into the hushed confines of the VIP green room. Inside, a handful of hand-picked journalists were waiting, their expressions a mixture of reverence and hunger. "Alora will be happy to share a few more details," Kaylin announced, her voice leaving no room for argument, about how her experiences in combat directly inspired me to create the fund. She was asking me to lie, to perform for them, to add another layer of fabricated heroism to her carefully constructed empire. The room was small, the air suddenly thin. The journalists' pens were poised. My years of training, of following orders, screamed at me to just do it, to play the part, but something inside me, a quiet, stubborn thing that had survived far worse than this, finally refused. "No," I said. The word was barely a whisper, but in the expectant silence, it landed like a stone. "I won't do that." Kaylin's smile didn't just fade, it vanished, sucked into a void of cold fury. Her eyes, which a moment ago had been warm for the cameras, turned to chips of ice. With a flick of her wrist, she dismissed the journalists. "We need a moment." The heavy door clicked shut, sealing us in. The air in the room became dense, suffocating. "What did you just say to me?" she hissed, her voice a low growl that was far more terrifying than any shout. She advanced on me, her $5,000 gown rustling like dry leaves. "Who the hell are you to defy me?" she roared. And then it happened. Fast as a striking snake, her right hand came up. It wasn't a slap, it was a punch, a calculated closed-fist hook that connected squarely with my cheekbone. A dry, sickening crack echoed in the small room. A flash of blinding white light exploded behind my eyes, erasing the sight of the antique wallpaper and the oil paintings. I staggered backward, my training to stay upright overridden by the sheer, paralyzing shock of the act. I crumpled, not fell, onto the expensive Persian rug. A high-pitched ringing screamed in my ears, drowning out the sound of her ragged breathing. The pain was sharp, electric, but it was a distant second to the shock. This wasn't an enemy combatant. This wasn't the chaos of a firefight. This was my sister, my own flesh and blood. She had hit me. Before I could process, before I could even draw a full breath, she was on me. She gave me no chance to recover. no moment to find my bearings. Her manicured fingers, like talons, tangled in my long hair, yanking my head back with brutal force. My scalp felt like it was being torn from my skull. "You think you're someone?" she spat, her face inches from mine, twisted in a mask of pure rage. "You're nothing, a little toy soldier." And then she started to drag me. The rough texture of the rug scraped against my skin as she pulled me, a dead weight, across the floor toward a side service door. Her goal was terrifyingly clear: to dispose of me, to throw me out like a bag of trash so I wouldn't ruin her perfect evening. The physical pain was immense, a searing fire from my scalp to my cheek, but the humiliation was 1,000 times worse. I was Alora Finch, a soldier who had faced down threats with courage and control, now being dragged across a floor by her own sister, helpless. The service door swung open, and my mother, Carol Finch, stood there. For a single desperate heartbeat, hope surged through me. "Mom, she'll stop this. She'll see." But she didn't. Her eyes took in the scene, me crumpled on the floor in a heap, her older daughter, Kaylin, standing over me, face flushed with fury, hand still knotted in my hair. My mother looked at me, then at Kaylin, and in that silent, damning moment, she chose her side. "Alora, my God, what did you do to make your sister this angry?" Her voice wasn't filled with concern for me. It was filled with accusation. She stepped forward, not to help me up, not to admonish Kaylin. She walked over and gently, almost lovingly, pried Kaylin's fingers from my hair. Then she began to soothe her, stroking her arm as if Kaylin were the victim. "Come on now, Kaylin, sweetheart. Don't let her ruin your night." In that instant, the throbbing in my cheekbone and the fire in my scalp ceased to matter. They were nothing. A different kind of pain, a deep structural agony, tore through me. Something inside my soul, something that had held on through years of slights and dismissals, finally broke. It shattered. Completely. I don't know how long I drove. The glittering lights of downtown Austin bled into the long, dark stretches of a Texas highway. My hands were steady on the wheel, a soldier's discipline, but my mind was a white noise storm. Eventually, the needle on the gas gauge dipped toward empty, forcing me to pull into a desolate 24-hour gas station, flickering under a lone street lamp. I walked on numb legs into the restroom. The air was stale, smelling of bleach and neglect. A single fluorescent bulb hummed and stuttered overhead, casting a harsh, buzzing light on the grimy mirror. For the first time since leaving the Driscoll, I dared to look at my own reflection. The woman staring back wasn't me. My left cheekbone was swollen, a grotesque blossom of purple and blue already blooming under the skin. It wasn't a war wound. It wasn't a mark of honorable service. This was Kaylin's brand, stamped onto my face with our mother's silent, damning approval. Staring at that bruise, I didn't see Alora, the veteran. I saw a scared little girl, the same scared little girl who had always, deep down, believed it was her fault. This punch wasn't a singular event. It was just the final, visible marker on a long, twisting road paved with invisible scars. Memory flooded back, cold and sharp. I was 12, and the Texas sun was blistering hot on the wooden dock at Lake Travis. It was our annual family vacation. I'd just reeled in a largemouth bass bigger than the one Kaylin had caught minutes earlier. Her smile had tightened, her eyes narrowing with that familiar flash of envy. I was celebrating, holding up my prize, when she moved. It was a hard, malicious shove, not a playful push. My feet slipped on the wet planks. I remember the sickening thud of my head hitting a wooden piling, and then the shocking, murky plunge into the lake. I came up sputtering, water and blood in my mouth. A deep gash on my forehead was pouring blood down my face. When my parents pulled me out of the water, Kaylin was already crying, her face a perfect mask of concern. "She slipped," she wailed. "I tried to catch her, but she just slipped." And my mother, wrapping a towel around my shivering shoulders, looked at the gash, then at me. "Alora, you need to be more careful," she said, her voice laced with that gentle, tired disappointment I knew so well. "You know how sensitive your sister is." They cleaned and bandaged the physical wound, but they poured poison into the one in my soul. The message was clear. It's your fault. You provoked her. You deserved it. The years spooled forward. Another memory just as vivid. I was 16. Kaylin, home from her freshman year of college, had taken our dad's car after drinking too much at a party. She'd caused a minor fender bender just a few blocks from our house. No one was hurt, but the police were there. To protect Kaylin's pristine record, my mother pulled me aside, her grip on my arm urgent. "You have to take the blame, Alora," she'd whispered, her eyes pleading. "You don't have a license yet. It'll just be a fine." But Kaylin, a DUI would ruin her future, her scholarships. So I did. I stood before a police officer, my heart hammering against my ribs, and I lied. I said I'd taken the car for a joyride. I felt a piece of my self-respect crumble and turn to dust with every word. It was another bitter lesson from the Finch family curriculum. My truth had a price, and I was always the one who had to pay it. Kaylin's lies, however, were always free of charge. I finally drove away from the gas station back to my small, empty studio apartment. I couldn't go to the house I'd grown up in. It wasn't home anymore. Inside, I walked to the small wooden footlocker at the end of my bed. The only thing I'd kept from my father. He'd made it himself. Inside, nestled next to his old, worn-out Bible, were the letters he'd sent me when I was deployed in Afghanistan. My fingers, still trembling slightly, found one. I unfolded the brittle paper. His familiar, strong handwriting filled the page. "Always be the keeper of your own moral compass, Alora," I read. "In the fog of war, or in the quiet of a false peace, you must always know which way your true north lies." My dad had passed away before Kaylin's ambition morphed her into this monster, but his words right here, right now, were a lighthouse in my storm. My true north, it was the truth. And I have to wonder, have you ever felt that? That moment when you realize that by staying silent to keep the peace, you're not just letting someone else down, you're betraying the very core of who you are? I finally understood. My silence in the face of Kaylin's abuse wasn't preserving the family. It was a desecration of it. It was a betrayal of my father's memory. And most of all, it was a betrayal of myself. The little girl on the dock, the teenager in front of the cop, the woman on the floor of the green room. I owed her the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. The moment I folded my father's letter and placed it back in the wooden box, the storm of grief and shock inside me solidified into something hard and cold. It was purpose. I didn't hesitate. The clock on my phone read 2:17 a.m. I found the number and pressed call. It rang twice before he picked up. "Merrick Thorne." His voice was groggy but professional. "Merrick, it's me, Alora." My own voice surprised me. It didn't tremble. It was flat, clear, and cold as steel. "I need a lawyer." I didn't cry. I didn't unload the years of pain. I delivered the facts, concise and brutal. "My sister assaulted me tonight. She's been using my military record to commit fraud, and I'm going to make it stop." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, just the faint hum of static. I could picture him sitting up in bed, instantly awake. Then he spoke, his tone shifting from sleepy to sharply focused. "Text me your address. I'll be there for breakfast. And Alora," he added, his voice dropping, deadly serious, "do not speak to anyone in your family again. From this moment on, they are the opposition." The word opposition clicked something into place inside me. It was a command, a mission parameter. It switched off the grieving sister and reactivated the soldier. I had a new objective. The next morning, just as the sun was casting long shadows across my small studio, Merrick knocked. He stood in my doorway, holding a brown paper bag from Torchy's Tacos and 2 large coffees. He was dressed in a crisp suit, already looking like he was heading to court. His eyes immediately found the bruise on my cheek, and I saw his expression darken for a fraction of a second. A flicker of anger he quickly suppressed. He said nothing about it. Instead, he walked past me, set the food down on my small kitchen table, and opened his laptop. "All right, Finch," he used my last name, the way a commanding officer would. It wasn't an insult, it was a sign of respect, a call to duty. "Situation report. I need everything, every lie, every time she exploited you, every suspicious financial dealing you're aware of." For the first time, I told my story not as a victim, but as an intelligence analyst delivering a briefing. I laid out the facts, the timelines, the key players, the gala, the fake charity, the years of emotional manipulation framed as business necessity. I was methodical, detached, pushing the pain aside to focus on the data. Merrick listened intently, his fingers flying across his keyboard, the rhythmic clicking the only sound in the room besides my voice. He'd nod occasionally, his face a mask of professional concentration. When I finished, he looked up from his screen. "The charity," he said, "the Aegis Veterans Fund. She claims it donates to specific organizations." "Which ones?" "I don't know," I admitted. "That was always her story, not mine." He leaned back, taking a sip of his coffee. "Then let's find out," he said, a challenge in his eyes. "You're an intelligence analyst, Finch. Use your skills." That night, my apartment was transformed into a command center. The tacos were long gone, replaced by the hum of my laptop. I was back in a familiar headspace, one where emotion was a liability and data was king. I began my deep dive, using the open-source intelligence, OSINT techniques the Army had drilled into me. I moved through the digital world like a ghost, sifting through public records, news articles, tax filings, and years of Aegis Innovations social media posts. I cross-referenced names, dates, and donation pledges. For hours, I found nothing but a polished, impenetrable corporate facade. But I knew better. Every fortress has a crack. And then I found it. It was buried in a local news article about a charity 5K run from 3 years ago. Aegis Innovations was listed as a minor sponsor. I dug deeper, pulling the event's financial disclosures. There it was in black and white, a single donation from the Aegis Veterans Fund for $500. My blood ran cold. I spent the next 2 hours searching for any other transaction, any other record of a donation from Kalen's so-called flagship charity. There was nothing. In 3 years of public fundraising, of invoking my name and my service, the fund had made exactly one verifiable contribution, $500. My hands were shaking as I typed out a quick, encrypted email to Merrick with my findings. A few minutes later, my phone rang. "Good work, Alora. Damn good work." Merrick's voice was sharp, energized. "This is our first concrete piece of evidence, fraud." But to follow the rest of the money, to see where it really went, we need a specialist. I've got a guy. I listened, my eyes fixed on the flowcharts and data points I'd mapped out on my screen. His name is Silas Vaughn, Merrick continued, ex-IRS criminal investigator. They call him the Hound because once he gets a scent, he never lets go. He'll find every single dime Kaylin has hidden. Merrick said he would set up a meeting. When I hung up the phone, I stared at my reflection in the dark computer screen. The woman looking back at me was still bruised, but she was no longer the victim being dragged across the floor. She was an analyst, and she had just found her first target. The next day, I walked into Merrick's law office in downtown Austin. It wasn't a flashy glass and chrome corporate space. It was a place of substance. Floor-to-ceiling wooden bookshelves overflowed with legal texts, and the air smelled faintly of old paper and fresh coffee. Through the large window behind his desk, the pink granite dome of the Texas state capitol stood sentinel, a silent promise of law and order. Merrick was there, and with him was another man. "Alora, this is Silas Vaughn," he said. Silas was an older man, maybe in his late 60s, with a quiet intensity that seemed to absorb the light in the room. He wore a faded button-down shirt, the kind that's been washed 100 times, and his face was a roadmap of deep lines. He didn't smile, just gave me a short, sharp nod. His eyes, sharp as a razor's edge, flickered to the bruise on my cheek for a single clinical moment, before moving away, granting me the dignity of not staring. "Ms. Finch," Silas said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Merrick tells me you have a problem with creative accounting." He paused, his gaze steady. "I don't care about family drama. I care about numbers, and numbers don't lie." His bluntness, his complete lack of sentimentality, was strangely comforting. It was a relief. He wasn't looking at me like a victim to be pitied, but like a client with a problem to be solved, a puzzle to be unraveled. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of safety. I laid out everything I had found, my voice steady, as I presented the data on the fraudulent charity. Merrick took notes, asking sharp, precise legal questions. Silas just listened, his eyes occasionally narrowing as he absorbed the details. He sat perfectly still, a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. When I finished, a heavy silence settled in the room. I braced myself for doubt, for the careful, skeptical questions that always came after I told my story. "Are you sure you're not just exaggerating? Or maybe you misunderstood?" But it never came. Merrick looked me straight in the eye. "I believe you, Alora," he said, his voice quiet but absolute. 100%. Then Silas finally spoke again, his gravelly voice cutting through the silence. "Kaylin Finch," he said, almost to himself. "I've heard the name. There have always been whispers. Now we have a place to start digging." They didn't just believe me. They validated every doubt, every suspicion I had secretly harbored for years. The feeling of being truly heard, of being seen without judgment, was like a cool stream of water on a parched soul. It was a feeling my own mother, my own sister, had never once given me. It was a profound, aching relief that brought an unexpected lump to my throat. Merrick stood up and walked to a small, unassuming mini-fridge in the corner of his office. He pulled out 3 long-neck bottles, beaded with condensation. Shiner Bock, the quintessential Texas beer. "It's been a long day," he said simply, handing a bottle to me and one to Silas. He raised his own slightly. "We're a team now." We sat there, the 3 of us, as the late afternoon sun cast golden bars of light through the window. We drank our beers, mostly in silence. A lawyer, an ex-IRS investigator, and a veteran. An unlikely trio. But in that quiet, sun-drenched office, surrounded by the scent of old books and the silent promise of justice, I felt a bond stronger than blood. It was the camaraderie I'd missed from my days in the service. A chosen family forged not by birth, but by mutual respect and a shared purpose. The fragile peace was shattered by the shrill ring of my cell phone. My stomach clenched. The screen read, "Mom." Merrick caught my eye and gave a subtle, deliberate nod toward the phone. I understood the command. I answered and pressed the speakerphone button. "Alora, where are you? Why haven't you been answering my calls?" My mother's voice filled the room, dripping with a practiced fake concern that made my skin crawl. "Kaylin is just devastated," she continued, her tone escalating into theatrical distress. "You hurt her so deeply. You need to come home, right now. We are a family, and we will sort this out as a family, quietly." She was still trying to manipulate me, still trying to pull me back into the familiar, suffocating cage of family obligation. The silence in the room was thick as Merrick and Silas listened. "Mom," I said, and my voice was ice. "I've hired a lawyer." The line went dead quiet. I could hear her breathing, a sharp intake of air. And then the mask of the concerned mother dropped, and the venom came through. "You dare!" she hissed, her voice low and sharp with disbelief and rage. "After everything this family has done for you, you ungrateful child." Then she hung up. The click of the disconnected call echoed in the silent room. The warmth from the beer, from the camaraderie, vanished. The cold, familiar shadow of my family had found me again, stretching all the way into this safe haven, and draped itself over everything. My mother's venomous words over the phone were not an end, but a prelude. The next day, Kaylin texted me, asking to meet for lunch. She chose the Kirby Lane Cafe, a cheerful, bustling Austin institution known for its pancakes and family-friendly vibe. The choice was strategic. It was public, neutral territory, a place where I couldn't cause a scene. When I arrived, I saw it was an ambush. Kaylin wasn't alone. My mother sat beside her in the booth, her hand clutching Kaylin's with a white-knuckled grip. The performance had already begun. Kaylin looked haggard, her eyes artfully swollen and red-rimmed as if she'd been crying for days. It was a masterclass in weaponized victimhood. The waitress came and went, oblivious to the tension coiling in our booth. "Alora," Kaylin began, her voice a fragile, rehearsed tremble. "I was wrong. I lost control. I've been under so much pressure, you have no idea." My mother immediately jumped in, playing her part in this well-oiled machine of manipulation. "Your sister loves you, Alora. She just doesn't always know how to show it," she cooed, her eyes pleading. "You can't destroy her life, her entire career, over one mistake." It was a classic pincer movement. The good cop and the bad cop working in tandem. One offered a tearful apology, the other applied the pressure of guilt. They were trying to make me feel cruel, to paint me as the unfeeling aggressor who was persecuting her poor, overwrought sister. But the girl who used to fall for this routine was gone. I just sat there, my face impassive, watching the show. After the initial love bombing failed to get a reaction, Kaylin shifted to the real reason for this meeting. She leaned forward, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "The company, we've run into a small cash flow problem," she said, as if sharing a secret. "It's temporary. I just need you to sign some papers. A loan guarantee. It's just a formality, really. It would stabilize everything, put all of this behind us." My mother added the final turn of the screw. It's the least you can do to help your sister, Alora, to keep our family intact. The trap was set. They didn't just want my silence anymore. They wanted my complicity. They wanted me to tie the noose around my own neck, and they were using the sacred ties of family as the rope. I looked across the table, past the sad, watery eyes and the trembling lip, and stared directly into Kaylin's soul. This time I saw no remorse. I saw no sister. I saw only cold, hard calculation. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it was a brick wall. I stood up, dropped a $10 bill on the table for my untouched iced tea, and walked out without looking back. The air outside felt clean, sharp. I got into my car, the engine turning over with a reassuring rumble. I was about to pull out of the parking lot when my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Ms. Finch, we found something. You should sit down. S.V. Silas." My heart began to hammer against my ribs. I parked the car again, my hands suddenly unsteady. I called the number. He picked up on the first ring. "Finch," his gravelly voice said. "All business." "I'm sitting down," I said, my own voice tight. "We started tracing your sister's financials," he began, his tone serious. "We found several fraudulent loans, just as you suspected. Kaylin used your name and your social security number to secure a substantial line of credit from a private lending firm." I closed my eyes, a wave of cold fury washing over me. It was what I expected. But then he continued. "But that's not all." He paused, and the silence stretched, heavy with dread. "A significant portion of that money, roughly $200,000, was immediately transferred into a secondary secret account." Another pause. My breath caught in my throat. "The account," Silas said, his voice devoid of emotion, "is in your mother's name, Carol Finch." The world stopped. The cheerful sounds of the cafe, the traffic on the street, my own breathing, it all ceased to exist. My heart, which had been hammering, felt like it had seized in my chest. I couldn't speak. I couldn't think. Silas's voice came through the phone as if from a great distance. "Our working theory is that your mother has no idea where the money came from. Kaylin likely lied to her, told her it was an early inheritance or a return on an investment. She's not just using you as a shield, Ms. Finch. She's using your mother as a vault for dirty money. And everything shattered. Again. But this time it was different. It wasn't the shattering of a daughter's heart. It was the shattering of an illusion. My mother's blind, ferocious defense of Kaylin. It wasn't just favoritism. It was the desperate act of a woman who had also been conned, manipulated by her favorite child into becoming an unwitting accomplice. A pawn in a much bigger, dirtier game. My fight was no longer just about my own honor. It wasn't just about the punch or the lies or the years of being made to feel small. Now it was about saving my mother from prison. About saving her from the ruin Kaylin had so carelessly orchestrated for both of us. The weight on my shoulders suddenly felt 100 times heavier, and my resolve became 100 times harder. I sat motionless in my car in the Kirby Lane parking lot, the phone still pressed to my ear long after Silas had hung up. The cheerful chaos of the cafe faded into a distant blur. The world outside my windshield seemed to warp and dissolve. Kaylin hadn't just betrayed me. She hadn't just used me. She had turned our own mother into a pawn in her sick, twisted game. A potential felon. The anger that had been simmering inside me for years finally boiled over. But it wasn't a hot, screaming rage. It was an ice-cold fury, a glacial certainty that settled deep in my bones. It clarified everything. My hand shot out, and I slammed my palm against the steering wheel. once, then twice. It wasn't a loss of control, it was a deliberate release, a percussive declaration of intent. The battle lines had just been redrawn. Kaylin had crossed a line from which there was no return. She had threatened the one other person in my fractured family that a primal, stubborn part of me was still wired to protect. The game was over. This was war. Without another moment of hesitation, I redialed Merrick. He answered immediately. "Merrick, change of plans," I said. My voice was sharp, devoid of any emotion except for a chilling resolve. "This is no longer a civil suit for damages. We're going criminal." I laid it out for him, the words coming fast and hard. Kaylin committed identity theft, wire fraud, and she dragged my mother into it as an accessory. We have to get ahead of her, Merrick, before she has time to bury the evidence or pin the whole thing on Mom. There was a brief, weighty silence on the other end. I could hear him processing, the wheels turning. "Understood, Alora," he finally said, his tone matching my own seriousness. "Solid copy. I'll start drawing up the necessary framework. But to make a criminal case stick, we need more than just financial records. We need an inside source. We need a witness." A witness, the word hung in the air. "There might be someone," Merrick said, his voice thoughtful. "A ghost, Cassandra Dwyer. She was Kaylin's COO, her right hand. She resigned suddenly about 6 months ago. No explanation, just vanished. If anyone knows where all the bodies are buried, it's her." He paused. "The problem is, she's completely off the grid." "Let me handle it," I said, a new mission objective crystallizing in my mind. That night, my apartment became a digital hunting ground. I wasn't looking for Cassandra Dwyer, the former executive. I was looking for the ghost she had become. I bypassed the usual channels, social media, professional networks. Those were for amateurs. I slipped into the deep web of data, using the skills the military had taught me to find people who didn't want to be found. I hunted for faint digital footprints, a credit card transaction for a bag of groceries at a small-town market, an anonymous 5-star review for a quiet bed and breakfast, a property tax record under a new, unassuming name. I stitched the disparate pieces together, following the trail away from the city, out into the rolling, peaceful expanse of the Texas Hill Country. And then I had her, a new name, a new life, in a tiny town I'd barely heard of, and a phone number. My heart pounded as I held the phone, the number glowing on the screen. This was it. The entire strategy hinged on this one call. I took a deep, steadying breath, the way I used to before a raid, and pressed the screen. It rang 4 times. I was about to hang up when a woman answered, her voice wary, cautious. "Hello?" "Ms. Dwyer," I said, keeping my voice level, non-threatening. "My name is Alora Finch." The silence on the other end was a physical thing. I could hear her sharp intake of breath, the frantic beating of a heart suddenly terrified. I don't know who you're talking about," she stammered, her voice trembling. "You do," I said, my voice firm but gentle. "I wasn't the enemy here. I know you left because you're a good person. I know what Kaylin was doing, and I know you couldn't be a part of it anymore." I leaned into the truth, making it my only weapon. "And now she's trying to destroy my mother. I'm not going to let that happen. I need your help, Cassandra, not for me, for everyone she's ever deceived." I heard a sound on the other end, a choked something. The dam of her fear had broken. When she spoke again, it was a whisper, fragile but clear. "Meet me at the Blue Bonnet Cafe in Marble Falls." She paused. "Come alone." The line went dead. I lowered the phone, my hand steady. I had her. I had found my witness. I had my most important ally. The war had begun, and I had just recruited my first soldier. The drive out to Marble Falls was quiet, the rolling green hills of the Texas Hill Country, a stark, peaceful contrast to the storm raging inside me. I found the Bluebonnet Cafe easily, a rustic, charming spot that smelled of freshly baked pies and strong coffee. I chose a booth in the back corner and waited, my nerves stretched taut. A few minutes later, she walked in. Cassandra Dwyer looked nothing like the sharp, confident Kyo I remembered from company photos. She looked tired, years older than her actual age, with a hunted look in her eyes that never seemed to rest. She slid into the booth opposite me, her hands trembling as she clutched her purse. She was hesitant at first, her answers to my gentle questions clipped and wary. She was terrified, and I understood why. So I changed tactics. I pulled out my phone and showed her the evidence Silas had uncovered, the fraudulent loan in my name and the secret bank account in my mother's. I explained how Kaylin had made our mother an unwitting accomplice. As she stared at the screen, something inside her broke. The fear in her eyes was replaced by a wave of grief and anger. Her carefully constructed dam of silence crumbled. "She's a monster," Cassandra whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "A complete monster. It wasn't just the investors. She was siphoning money from the Veterans Fund, Alora. Millions. She called it marketing expenses and administrative overhead, but it was just theft. I couldn't watch it anymore. I couldn't be a part of it." Her confession tumbled out, a torrent of suppressed guilt and horror. When she was finished, she reached into her purse and pulled out a small silver USB drive. She slid it across the table. "This is everything," she said, her voice barely audible. "I backed it all up before I left. Internal financial reports, hidden ledgers, emails, everything Kaylin thought she had deleted. Use it, please, stop her." I drove back to Austin with the USB drive feeling like a live grenade in my pocket. I met Merrick and Silas back at the law office, the sun having already set, casting long dark shadows from the Capitol building across the street. The mood was tense, expectant. We plugged the USB drive into Merrick's laptop. The three of us huddled around the screen as files bloomed to life. It was all there, hard evidence of tax fraud, embezzlement, wire fraud, enough to put Kaylin away for years. Silas was methodical, his sharp eyes scanning spreadsheets that would have been meaningless to anyone else. He was following the money, and the trail was damning. And then he stopped. "Here," he grunted, pointing his finger at a folder on the screen. It was labeled simply Project Liberty. My heart hammered. I leaned in closer. The folder contained a chain of heavily encrypted emails. "Let me," I said, taking over the keyboard. My military training in signals intelligence kicked in. My fingers flew, bypassing the encryption protocols, unspooling the thread of Kaylin's deepest secret. The decrypted text filled the screen, and the three of us fell into a stunned, horrified silence. It was worse than we could have ever imagined. The emails laid out a clear, undeniable conspiracy. Kaylin had paid a series of bribes to a high-ranking official at the Pentagon. In exchange, this official had falsified government documents, certifying that Aegis Innovations' cybersecurity technology had been field-tested and validated in active military operations in the Middle East. It was a staggering, bald-faced lie. A lie that had allowed Kaylin to secure millions of dollars in lucrative, sensitive government contracts. "My God," Merrick breathed, leaning back in his chair as if he'd been physically struck. His face was pale. "This isn't just financial fraud anymore. This is a felony against the United States government. This is a federal crime." Silas nodded grimly, his face set like stone. "This changes everything," he said, his gravelly voice low. "She's not just facing the IRS now, she's facing the FBI." The case had escalated to a level that made me feel dizzy. This wasn't a family squabble anymore. This wasn't a civil suit. The secret weapon Cassandra had given us wasn't just a handgun. It was an atomic bomb, set to detonate under the foundations of Kaylin's entire life. My personal battle for honor had become a matter of national security, a fight to expose a traitor operating from within. With the undeniable evidence laid out before us, Merrick began to type. He wasn't drafting a civil complaint. He was composing a formal notification, a letter to be sent directly to Kaylin's high-powered legal team. It didn't threaten a lawsuit. It simply requested one final mediation meeting, a last chance to resolve the matter before our entire cache of evidence, including Project Liberty, was handed over to the U.S. Attorney's Office. It was a checkmate move, a final, calculated gambit offering Kaylin one last opportunity to surrender before we brought down the full, crushing weight of the federal government upon her. As I watched Merrick hit send, the email disappearing into the ether, I didn't feel the triumphant thrill of victory I had expected. There was no joy, no sense of righteous satisfaction. There was only the cold, heavy certainty that the final battle was about to begin. We were seated in the largest conference room in Merrick's firm, a space paneled in dark wood that felt both somber and official. I sat to Merrick's right, Silas to his left. We were a silent, unified front, the calm in the center of a storm we had summoned. The air was thick with a tense, electric anticipation. The door opened and Kaylin swept in. She didn't just walk. She made an entrance, a display of power and untouchable confidence. She was flanked by a team of 3 expensive-looking lawyers in perfectly tailored suits, their Italian leather briefcases gleaming under the recessed lighting. She wore a pristine white dress, an ironic, almost defiant choice for the occasion. Her presence radiated a single message. She was not here to repent. She was here to conquer. She smiled directly at me, a cold, predatory gleam in her eyes that completely ignored the men beside me. "Well, I'm so glad you finally decided to be reasonable, Alora," she said, her voice loud and clear, designed to establish her dominance from the outset. "I'm sure we can clear up this little misunderstanding quickly and get on with our lives." She still believed she was the hunter, in complete control of the environment. She thought this was about a simple shakedown, a messy but manageable family squabble that her money and influence could easily swat away. She had no idea she had walked into a meticulously laid trap. She wasn't the hunter, she was the prey, and the cage door had just swung shut behind her. Merrick began, his voice calm and measured, a scalpel cutting through her manufactured confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are not here to discuss a misunderstanding," he stated, his eyes fixed on Kaylin's lead counsel, a man with silver hair and an air of bored superiority. "We are here to discuss felony identity fraud." He slid a neat stack of documents across the polished mahogany table. The papers landed with a soft, definitive thud. "This is the paperwork for a $200,000 loan from a private lender, taken out in my client's name, using her social security number, without her knowledge or consent." Kaylin's silver-haired lawyer picked up the papers with a theatrical sigh. He glanced at them briefly, as if they were a minor nuisance, and pushed them back. "I'm sure we'll find this was a simple family consensus, an informal arrangement that Ms. Finch is now mischaracterizing," he said smoothly. Merrick didn't flinch. His expression remained placid. Next, he said, turning his head slightly towards Silas. On cue, Silas placed another, much thicker file on the table. This is a forensic accounting report on the Aegis Veterans Fund, prepared by Mr. Vaughn here. The atmosphere in the room began to shift. The smug certainty on the faces of Kalen's legal team started to curdle into visible annoyance. The report details 3 years of aggressive public fundraising, totaling over $4 million, Merrick continued, his voice a relentless, even drone. It also details a single, solitary donation made by the fund in that time, $500 to a local marathon. The rest of the funds, as Mr. Vaughn's report painstakingly documents, have been funneled through a series of shell corporations directly into Ms. Kalen Finch's personal accounts. Kalen's face remained a mask of cold indifference, but a single involuntary tell betrayed her. The rhythmic, impatient tapping of her long manicured fingernail on the tabletop. Tap, tap, tap. A tiny crack in the perfect, impenetrable facade. Her lead counsel shot her a warning glance. And finally, Merrick said, his voice dropping, becoming quieter, which somehow made it more menacing. He picked up a small remote from the table. We have Project Liberty. He aimed the remote at the large presentation screen on the wall, which had been dark until now. It flickered to life. The decrypted text of Kalen's emails filled the screen, stark and undeniable in a plain, bold font. The words Pentagon, bribe, falsified documents, and the name of a high-ranking government official were illuminated for all to see. A digital confession of treasonous conspiracy. The effect was instantaneous. It was as if a vacuum had sucked all the air out of the room. Kalen's lawyers froze, their faces turning a pasty ashen gray. They stared at the screen, mouths slightly agape, their billion-dollar educations and years of courtroom experience rendered utterly useless in the face of such blatant, irrefutable criminality. And Kalen, for the first time in my entire life, I saw her lose control. The mask didn't just crack, it shattered into a million invisible pieces. Her mouth fell open, the color drained from her face, leaving only her bright red lipstick looking garish and absurd. She stammered, her hand flying up to point a trembling finger at me, her composure completely gone. Where did you get that? Raw, undiluted panic flared in her eyes. Her empire of lies, her entire world, was collapsing in on her in real time, right here in this sterile, silent room. But instead of crumbling, her survival instincts kicked in. She did something I never expected. She performed. With a sudden burst of theatrical energy, she shot to her feet. Her eyes darted around, found the small, discreet camera one of her own lawyers had placed on the table to record the meeting, and she looked directly into its lens. "Do you see?" she cried, her voice breaking with manufactured hysteria. "Do you see how far she will go? My own sister, she has always been jealous of my success. She fabricated all of this, all of these disgusting lies, just to destroy me and my company." She wasn't trying to deny the evidence. She was trying to change the narrative, to turn this legal proceeding into a media soundbite, a desperate, preemptive strike for the court of public opinion. It was a brilliant, narcissistic, and fatally flawed move. Her lead lawyer was already shaking his head, his face a mask of horror, trying to get her to sit down, but it was too late. Merrick let her finish her tirade, his face impassive. When she was done, breathing heavily, he calmly addressed her. "Thank you, Ms. Finch," he said, his voice cool and devastatingly polite. This recording, in which you fail to deny a single specific allegation and instead launch a character assault on my client, will serve as an excellent exhibit of motive and a complete lack of remorse for the federal grand jury. Kaylin's performative sob caught in her throat. The tactical, pity-seeking smile she had been trying to muster froze on her face. The trap had snapped shut, and she had just willingly, eagerly lit the match to her own funeral pyre. After the meeting, after Kaylin's spectacular self-destruction, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel the cathartic release I had imagined. I just felt empty. A profound, bone-deep exhaustion settled over me, the kind that comes after a long, grueling war. I drove back to my studio apartment in a daze, pulled the blinds shut, and fell into a heavy, dreamless sleep that lasted 14 hours. When I finally woke, the world outside had shifted on its axis. The story had broken. News alerts buzzed on my phone with headlines about the Aegis Innovations scandal and the tech CEO facing federal charges. The company Kaylin had built on lies was imploding. Investors were pulling out. The board was in chaos. Everything had gone exactly according to plan. But as I read the news, I felt no joy. There was only a quiet, hollowing sadness for the irrevocable fracture of it all. It was a victory that felt an awful lot like a loss. A few days later, my mother came to my apartment. She didn't call first. She just appeared at my door, looking frail and broken. The manipulative puppet master was gone, replaced by a desperate, grieving woman. All the fight had gone out of her. She began to cry before she even spoke, her shoulders shaking with ragged sobs. "You have to stop this, Alora," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "You have to take it all back. She's still your sister. Our family, our name, it will be destroyed." I looked at my mother, at the tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks, and the anger I had carried for so long simply dissolved. All that was left was a deep, aching pity. "Mom," I said, my voice gentle, "Kaylin destroyed our family a long, long time ago." I led her inside and sat her down on my small sofa. "I'm not doing this to hurt her," I continued softly. "I'm doing this to stop her from hurting anyone else, including you." I then told her everything. I told her about the fraudulent loan. I told her about the secret bank account in her name, the one holding $200,000 of stolen money. I explained how Kaylin hadn't just used me as a shield, but had used her as a vault, putting her in direct legal peril. She stared at me, her tear-filled eyes wide with disbelief, then dawning horror. The truth in all its ugly, brutal detail seemed to finally land, and it was a blow that seemed to crush what little was left of her spirit. She didn't argue. She didn't defend Kaylin. She just sat there looking small and lost, and for the first time, I think she truly saw the monster her favorite daughter had become. After she left, a strange sort of clarity settled over me. I knew what I had to do. I sat down at my small table with a pen and 2 fresh sheets of paper. I needed to draw the new maps. I needed to write the new borders. The first letter was to Kaylin, who was under house arrest in her multi-million-dollar mansion, awaiting trial. I didn't fill it with accusations or rage. There was no point. I wrote only a single quiet sentence. "I hope that one day you find some peace in the truth." The second letter was to my mother. It was harder to write. I told her that I loved her, that a part of me would always love her, but I also told her that I needed space, and I needed time to heal. I wouldn't sever the connection completely, but I would no longer allow myself to be pulled back into the toxic vortex of their world. I was building a boundary, a wall not of anger, but of self-preservation. Writing those letters, sealing them in their envelopes, was one of the hardest things I've ever done, and the most liberating. A few days later, I found myself walking the grounds of the Texas Capitol, drawn to the Vietnam Veterans Monument. I stood before the polished granite walls, my fingers tracing the names of fallen soldiers etched into the stone. I thought about honor, sacrifice, and truth. I realized I had just fought a different kind of war, not in the sands of Afghanistan, but right here in my own home, for the terrain of my own soul. And in the quiet of that place, I understood that to truly win this war, I didn't need to hate Kaylin. The only person I truly needed to forgive was myself. Forgive myself for being silent for so long. Forgive myself for believing I wasn't enough. Forgive myself for thinking their love was something I had to earn. I thought of the serenity prayer, a simple plea for wisdom. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. I couldn't change Kaylin. I couldn't change my mother. The courage to change the things I can. I could change myself. I could change how I responded, where I drew my lines. And the wisdom to know the difference, that was it. That was the wisdom I had paid such a heavy price to learn. It wasn't about winning or losing against them. It was about choosing to finally, fully live for myself. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by the ghosts of heroes, I finally felt a sense of peace. A year has passed. The seasons in Texas have turned, and with them, so has my life. The wheels of justice, though they grind slowly, ground exceedingly fine. Kaylin was convicted on multiple counts of fraud and bribery. The judge handed her a 7-year federal prison sentence. Because of her cooperation, my mother wasn't prosecuted, but she had to pay back every cent of the laundered money. The civil suit granted me a settlement of $280,000. But the number on the check never really mattered. It was the freedom that was priceless. The freedom from the shadows, from the lies, from the weight of a life that was never truly mine. With a portion of the settlement, I bought a small house on a quiet street in the suburbs of Austin. It has a screened-in back porch and a small backyard, just big enough for a few rows of tomato plants and some herbs. It's quiet, it's safe, it's mine. I didn't return to the army. My war is different now. I took the rest of the money and all of my time and poured it into a new mission. I became a peer support counselor for Grace After Fire, a nonprofit organization right here in Texas that helps female veterans navigate the often treacherous terrain of civilian life. I don't command or strategize anymore. I listen. I listen to their stories, stories of combat, stories of loss, and so often stories of feeling invisible after taking off the uniform. I help them translate their military skills onto a resume. I sit with them as they grapple with the invisible scars they carried home, the ones that don't show up on any medical chart. In their stories, I hear echoes of my own, and I realized Kaylin had been right about one thing. My story had power. Not the power to defraud and manipulate, but the power to connect and to heal. A few months ago, a young woman came into the center. She was timid, her eyes holding the same haunted look I remembered seeing in my own reflection. She told me about her older brother, a successful and beloved entrepreneur in his city. She spoke in whispers about how he used her, belittled her, and twisted every situation to make her feel like she was the problem. "Everyone thinks he's a saint," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Sometimes I feel like I'm going crazy." I looked at her and I saw myself a year ago, drowning in the silence of someone else's narrative. I didn't offer her advice. I didn't tell her what to do. I just looked her in the eye and gave her the one thing I had so desperately needed. "You are not crazy," I said, softly but firmly. "And you are not alone." Then I wrote down Merrick Thorne's phone number and slid the piece of paper across the table to her. The cycle of silence had been broken for me, and now I was helping someone else break theirs. Tonight, I'm sitting on my back porch. A blank notebook and a pen are on the table in front of me. A warm Texas breeze rustles the leaves of the oak tree in my yard. My relationship with my mother is slowly, cautiously mending. It's built on the new, healthy boundaries I've learned to create. We talk once a week, not about the past, but about the future, about the progress of the tomato plants in my garden, or the new book she's reading. I haven't seen Kaylin. I don't know if I ever will. And I've realized that it no longer matters. Her story and mine have finally, irrevocably, diverged. I open the fresh, clean notebook. The first page is blank, a pristine field of white, waiting. I pick up the pen, its weight solid and real in my hand. I take a breath, smelling the sweet scent of jasmine from a neighbor's fence, and then I begin to write. My name is Alora Finch. I am writing my story, one true word at a time. Not the story my sister invented for me, not the story my mother wanted me to live, my own. It's a story about a silence that was shattered, about the wounds that come not from enemy fire, but from the ones who are supposed to love you most. And it's a story about a soldier who finally found her peace, not on a foreign battlefield, under a burning sun, but right here, in the quiet green of her own backyard. That first line I wrote, "My name is Alora Finch." It was more than just words. It was a promise to myself to never be silenced again. And I know somewhere out there listening, many of you have your own stories. Stories that have been quieted, dismissed, or overshadowed. If you feel comfortable, I invite you to share a piece of your journey in the comments below. Your voice deserves to be heard. And if stories of resilience and finding strength speak to you, please follow the Chosen Revenge channel so you don't miss what's next.